Hello, and thank you for joining this week's episode of Behind the Story. I'm Eli Sherman. Each week, we try to take you behind the scenes of some of the biggest stories and most interesting stories that happen across Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe, and our guest is Antonia Farzan of the Providence Journal. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
So today, we asked you on today because you wrote this brilliant story this week for Political Scene called Sticking Point in the newspaper. Online, it's called An Invisible Road and Parking Lot, Napatree Point Pits Watch Hill Against Westerly. And everyone should go read it on the Providence Journal's website. We'll also have a link on our website to it as well. But in a nutshell, it sort of is a fight over access to Napatree Point in Westerly, which is a beautiful beach. Everyone should go visit. It's wonderful. And the Watch Hill Fire District, and correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, but the Watch Hill Fire District is suing the town, claiming that this road that was destroyed by the 1938 Great Hurricane, that the town doesn't have access to that. They do. And residents of the town are fighting back, saying that this is a power grab and they're trying to limit access to this beach. How did you come about this story? Well, how did it land on your desk, and why did you decide to do it?
Yeah, so the question is really whether the road exists at all or whether it exists on paper, because physically it was wiped out in the Hurricane of 38 along with all the houses there. There is still a bit of a parking lot. Anyone who's been to Napatree Point probably knows it's kind of weird how you get there. You walk through this parking lot where you're kind of going behind the Misquamica Club and behind the Watch Hill Yacht Club, and you're like, am I in the right place? And
yeah, you feel lost going to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of the root of this controversy, actually. So I've been following it for about 2 years, ever since the Watch Hill Fire District filed this lawsuit. And what got me wanting to do it right now is that stuff started circulating on social media. Activists were saying essentially that Westerly was trying to give away access to Watch Hill. And I started hearing from people saying, what's going on? I'm sorry, not access to Watch Hill, but access to Napatree Point in particular. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's a place that's so beloved for people from Rhode Island. Even if you haven't been there, you've definitely seen the photos. I mean, it's such an iconic spot. So people were contacting me asking what is happening. And I would try and explain, it is still open to the public. The fire district, from their perspective, they're saying that they are not filing this lawsuit to cut off access. But the council essentially is trying to be proactive. Activists are trying to be proactive in protecting access to this area by saying that this road that you can physically see is still there.
Yeah, residents aren't buying that the Watch Hill Fire District's words of comfort that they're not trying to limit access, and we're going to hear from them a little bit later. But just to give people a sense of what we're talking about here and what happened with the Great Hurricane of 1938, which I think a lot of Rhode Islanders know was completely devastating to the state. They didn't, there was no warning that the hurricane was even coming, so it caught everybody by surprise. And we went back into the archives and actually found a documentary. I don't know when it was done. I think maybe in the 1980s or something. And we're going to play a little clip of it for you here now.
All occurred on the southern beaches of Rhode Island. Napatree Point had been a delicate spit of land stretching westward from Watch Hill. There was literally nothing left of the dozens of solid homes. Many of these people were swept across the bay to safety, but just as many. But the worst destruction.
I love that video.
So good. So good.
Dan.
Can we back it up for a second? Can you just explain why Watch Hill needs a fire district of its own?
That's a great question. Many people would argue that it does not.
Right.
So basically, these fire districts are so strange, and I want to give credit to the Public's Radio here because they've done a lot of the reporting on the South County fire districts and really documented several years ago how much of their money is actually spent on firefighting. So Watch Hill is one that it was created as fire protection for people who lived in this area, and it does still have a fire department. But if you look at how much that is of their annual budget, it's a very, very small part. They also own the carousel in Watch Hill. They own the parking lot that you probably pay to park, that you cross in order to get to Napatree Point. They own a lot of stuff in Watch Hill, and they're almost kind of, they're a quasi-public agency. They're almost kind of like a separate little town within a town.
And then there's you have a great quote in the story where a person kind of views this as uses the term elitism in this. Is the Watch Hill Fire District sort of viewed as the protector of the wealthy?
Definitely, I think that's a perception from a lot of people in Westerly. Yeah, that they feel that it's a very exclusive area, that basically the fire district exists essentially to create regulations to keep people out. And they would point out, I think, they operate Watch Hill Beach, which is open to the public. But you also see, and some of this is not just the fire district, it's people who live in Watch Hill. For instance, like last year I covered a story where in Watch Hill, there's a boat ramp, but there's no parking for the boat ramp. There's nowhere you can actually park your car and take your kayak out. So the Westerly Harbor Management Commission was like, hey, how about we put a bunch of parking spots down here? And people in Watch Hill absolutely freaked out. We're like, this is going to destroy our community, destroy our property values. So I think people do have a reason for feeling that they are not welcome
And
there.
we should remind everybody, like, this is where Taylor Swift has a home. So we are talking about some people who live in that area who are extraordinarily wealthy. And you'll hear from some of the residents later who say they feel like they're almost like, I think the word they use is a forgotten stepson, or the rest of Westerly. So there is this tension that you did a really good job in your story of exploring. Where do you see this heading?
I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with the lawsuit. I mean, part of the reason why there was this moment now where people got really concerned is because there was talk about a potential settlement, and people reacted really negatively because the feeling from the public was that any kind of settlement is going to be essentially giving something away, that we shouldn't give up any claim. And people really, we see all the time that there'll be these closed sessions where they'll talk about strategy in the lawsuit. People reacted really negatively to that. So there definitely is very strong public pressure to fight this in court. And I personally would love to see it go into court and have this be a public discussion, not just behind the scenes with lawyers sending letters, but actually see them fight over whether or not this road exists.
Yeah, one of the things I really took away from your story is how involved the public really is over this fight, because just as you say, sometimes when this enters into the realm of court, we don't have a great view of it. Filings happen, but unless you're watching the docket, you don't necessarily know that they're happening, or if you're going to the hearings. But people are really, really fired up about this issue in particular, and rightfully so. That you mentioned how strange it is to access that beach, but once you do, you feel like you can see Montauk from the tip of it across the water.
Totally, it's amazing. And there is a conservation easement saying that Napatree Point itself has to be open to the public, but you can't, unless you have a boat, you can only get there by walking across that parking lot, and there's no requirement saying that parking lot has to be open and that they have to let you onto Napatree Point from there. So that's what people are so concerned about.
I think in a little while we're going to hear from some of the debate that happened at the town council meeting, but I'm curious, for viewers and for people who are watching us, we've covered lots of sort of zoning battles or kind of local town fights. And sometimes, admittedly, right, we're talking to the people, the 3 or 4 people who are the loudest, the angriest, the most passionate, have the most to lose potentially. But it seems like this issue, and it's not just this specific one, but in Westerly, we've got a lot of different issues going on there that has really galvanized way more than just kind of the typical gadflies. But can you put that into context? I mean, this feels like it's got everybody in Westerly talking.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely feels that way. And I think there's part of it's just there's really high level of distrust. That's one thing I really picked up from watching, is that people really do not trust not just this council, but just in general the public officials, because they look at how many ways access has been cut off elsewhere in Westerly and Watch Hill particularly, and feel that government has not served them. So then so in fact you have the previous council president. He was actually he resigned. He said it was the normal reasons, but there had been a controversy about how he took money from the Watch Hill Fire District as a consultant. So people see that and kind of worry about, who are our politicians really representing.
Okay, well, we have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll be hearing directly from some of those residents who are upset about this. Stick with us. Hello, and welcome back to Behind the Story. I'm Eli Sherman, joined by my co-host Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe and Projo reporter Antonia Farzan. We're talking about Antonia's story in the Projo about access and to Napatree Point in Westerly. And one of the things I really liked about this story is all of the colorful quotes that you were able to gather as part of your reporting. And some of those were from a public meeting on May 19th in the town. It was a town council of Westerly, right? And we put together, with your help, thank you so much for that, actually the footage from that meeting. So take a listen to what some residents are saying.
Watch Hill Fire District is fighting this ROW so hard. After claiming for years, they have no intention of ever blocking public access. Why not allow the ROW to be formally designated?
We live here year round. We've been going to that beach forever. And I don't think it's right to make any kind of concession. We own the road. We own the row right now. Why are we even talking to these people?
In my 9 years at South County Tourism, I've witnessed the Watch Hill Fire District leaders work to decrease parking, gain the lighthouse, and do everything possible to decrease public access. It is not time to hide out in executive sessions.
I think of Watch Hill as elitist, and that Westerly is the poor stepchild of this town, and that nothing is representative of the people who live in the other side of the town. And when you go to Watch Hill, you feel like you're not welcome.
I think the greatest solution would be, let's take the sand trail by eminent domain. Let's take Napatree Point by eminent domain. Let's take the Weekapaug Fire District Marina by eminent domain and tell everybody else to screw.
I love the tough guy face there at the end. But the one comment I have to make is I think for people who are watching this in all of Rhode Island and in southeastern Massachusetts, the guy with the Yankees hat doesn't win over anybody.
True.
So, Antonia, to their credit, the fire district, as you mentioned earlier, is not claiming that, they dispute that they're trying to limit access. What is your sense as to what the rationale is, that why do they even want it if that's not what it's about?
Yeah, that's one of the things that's honestly a little hard to understand. I wish I'd been able to sit down for an interview with them.
Which they declined.
Which they declined, yeah. And I had also tried, I believe, 2 years ago as well. And they
do have pretty good lawyers, though.
They do, yeah. And essentially, I mean, what they lay out in their statements, which is all they've said, is basically that it's about defending private property, which is their property and their property rights. They also made a claim that there would be potentially building a road, that if this is a public road, then you would have a road essentially built over the dunes, which is something, having watched all these meetings, I can tell you no one is asking for. No one is trying to pave over the dunes. But they have kind of raised the specter of conservation. They do a lot for conservation in that area. So there is definitely, it is definitely a very sensitive, very fragile area that they've done a lot to protect. So I think there is kind of valid claim about, them wanting to protect that area and do whatever it takes to keep it so pristine. But some people kind of see that and wonder, well, is this also a way to keep people from using it altogether?
Is there anyone on the side of the Watch Hill Fire District? Like, is Taylor Swift's lawyers writing in and saying, hey, we're with you?
Not to my knowledge, but I would say people in Watch Hill definitely have. Yeah. And also some people in Westerly have also asked, is it really a good idea for the town to be spending so much money on this lawsuit? Because they've got multiple shoreline access lawsuits going right now. And there has been some questions about whether that is actually rational.
And one of the arguments, right, was around the whole talk about settlement was actually this was kind of normal course of business. Some new council members came in, needed to catch them up, but it has led to this at least beginning of a potential recall conversation. Tell us about that. I mean, it's one thing to be angry at what a council is doing, angry over a lawsuit. It's another thing to potentially recall these people from office, and the council president is facing a little bit of a recall.
Totally, yeah, and this is a new council that just came in this year. So the council president, there is a petition drive that got started. They're still in the process of collecting signatures to recall him, and that started when this news came out about a potential settlement. Interestingly, in the last council meeting in early June, they basically voted to say, we're not going to continue talks about this. We're going to instruct the town's attorney to defend our position in court. Basically, we're going to keep fighting, which is what activists wanted, but the petition drive is still going. So there still is a sense, essentially, that the council's not strong enough and not doing enough to stand up for the public's interest here. I mean, whether that's fair or not is obviously debatable, but that's where it's coming from. And there's also a sense, I think, that people were really frustrated when they heard that there was potentially settlement and just didn't really know what else to do.
Do you get a sense that that's gaining a lot of traction, that petition?
It's hard to say. I mean, when I interviewed the council president, he did mention that he also feels that there's some political motivation behind it, just different factions of Westerly politics, and that some people who are latching onto it have reasons other than shoreline access for wanting him out to switch the dynamics on the council. So I think if it does gain traction, does go forward, that it might not be just about Napatree Point.
Can you give us a rundown, if you know it, around sort of the politics that are at play? Westerly, for a long time, did have sort of a Republican, kind of a sort of a liberal Republican leadership, but I think it's become much more liberal and much more blue in recent years. But is it a red-blue thing, or is it more kind of literally over this issue?
Yeah, there's definitely an element of red and blue for sure, but it is interesting with the shoreline access issue how much the normal coalitions maybe don't split along those lines, especially with the last council, which was probably the most aggressively pro-access council that Westerly's had for a while, and that was the one that got in all these lawsuits. You had independents, for instance, who were very much on the side of saying we need to fight to defend access. So it's almost kind of unpredictable. That's kind of why I like covering this issue, is you don't necessarily know which way people are going to fall on it.
Antonia does a lot of really great and unique stories, so people should follow her along for all of the reporting that she does. When we do big stories like this that take a lot of time, and I assume this probably took you a fair amount of time to put together, and you never really know how they're going to land. And I'm wondering if you've gotten any feedback. I know this just published a few days ago, but any feedback that you've gotten either from the town or the fire district or any residents, anything like that?
Yeah, I have not gotten any pushback yet, so that's
nice.
A good sign. And it definitely seems
Your facts are right.
yeah, that I know of, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, but definitely got a pretty positive response for advocates just for calling attention to this. And it seems like people definitely appreciated the story who are on the side of, making this a public right-of-way. And it seems like there might be, people have been asking me to look more into what's going on with Watch Hill and the council and different dynamics there. So it seems like there will be a lot more.
You're going to be moving to Watch Hill probably. I think
Hard pass.
One thing I admire about your reporting, not just on this story, but in general, is you always are willing to kind of swing for the quirkiest of stories. It seems like it's kind of your hallmark. Why do you love stories like this one?
That's an interesting question. I do think it's kind of like what we were just talking about when you have these kind of unexpected alliances. Sometimes that can be really interesting and things that are not. I feel like it's very boring to do a story where you already know what people are going to say and where they're going to stand on issues.
Much easier,
Much easier, but not as interesting. So I like stories where there's a potential to surprise me. And I think I also like stories where, like you just showed the documentary from Harkin of 1938, it's really interesting when you try and dig into the root cause of why are we in this situation to begin with? And very often the answer is something that happened 100 years ago that people had no idea would have these implications today.
That's wild. And she references some good readings in her story as well that people should go check out if they want to learn more. I read a great book called The Great Hurricane, 1938 by Cherry Burns. And it's just, it's a great way to go back in time and learn about something that really was quite devastating to the state and now is creating a legal fight a century later. So we have to take another quick break. I encourage everybody to go read Antonia's full story on the Projo website or pick up the paper, and we will also have a link of it on our website at WPRI.com. Antonia, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. This is fun.
Okay, and when we come back, Dan and I will discuss the stories that we wish we wrote this week, so stay with us. Welcome back to Behind the Story. I'm Eli Sherman, joined by my co-host, Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe. Dan, we are bringing back a recurring segment here in the last bit of show that we have to brag about some of the other stories that we really like this week. And the segment is called The Stories We Wish We Wrote. Your eye this week.
Well, I feel like this episode is all about the beach, and so to keep
staying on
that point, Ellen Lieberman in Rhode Island Monthly, who's one of my favorite writers in the state. I think she does such a fabulous job at Rhode Island Monthly. Has a story that just published online very recently. I'm not sure if it was in the magazine last month, but it's called "How Rhode Island is Attempting to Stem the Tide," and it's about kind of shoreline erosion all over the state. She really kind of dug in deep, kind of takes it from the lens of a couple of residents residents who are kind of experiencing this up front, and then takes a look, kind of steps back and at the, the ways Rhode Island is trying to kind of address the issue. I thought it was really well done. It's kind of an issue that as we head into summer, it's very hot right now. It's something we're all thinking about. You notice it when you go to the beach. And
yeah, the amount of erosion that she was mentioning in there, it wasn't just like a foot, it was 3, 5, and then when the storms come, it was like 40, 60 feet that were being lost but to erosion. And the thing I really liked about that story that I didn't think about beforehand is that it's obvious that with hurricanes you get beach erosion, so you think hurricane season is really where you see the most damage, but actually what was explored in the piece is that there's been these storms in the winter that have been happening, rainstorms. I think 2024 there was a crazy storm in January or February or something like that, and it just hammered the beach and really took a bunch away from it. So yeah, that was a really, really good piece.
Alan did a great job. What do you got?
So I got a couple, and it's, everything's bridge with the Washington Bridge. I can't believe how many bridge stories I've read in the last couple of years. But there are two that really caught my eye. The first is by David Wright with the Rhode Island PBS and the Public's Radio. He did a really good story of looking at all of the bridges in Rhode Island and their inspection reports and how they fare. And one of the things that jumped out to me were a couple of stats is that 15% of the 783 Rhode Island bridges, 15% are in poor conditions, and ranking us among the worst in the state, which is pretty common knowledge. But the thing that really jumped out is that 75 of those have been on the poor list every year for nearly the past decade.
Right.
So there are different designations of what a bridge gets, and poor is the lowest, I think, right above, like, you cannot drive on it. So it's just a kind of a stark reminder that bridges are kind of scary.
Well, can I say, I love that this is getting so much, and obviously it's the Washington Bridge, the reason why it's getting so much attention, but Eli, this, I feel like for years and years and years, these bridge, ranking stories come out and they get virtually no attention. They're C-block in the news. They're, the back pages of the newspaper.
Yeah.
And now everybody's kind of really taking a hard look at it, and it's pretty frightening.
Yeah. And the second bridge story, and we're running out of time here, is by my colleague Tim White. He did a story about the Mount Hope Bridge, and the quasi-public agency there is not releasing an inspection report, and that Tim has been fighting for. People should check it out. That is all the time that we have. This episode will be available on the website, WPRI.com, and on YouTube. You can also find it on wherever you get your podcasts. For Dan McGowan, I'm Eli Sherman. Thanks for watching Behind the Story.